White families have always been pathetically sad, and history proves it. White people love to act like they are the gold standard for family values, yet their entire history is a long, depressing saga of isolation, neglect, and emotional coldness. They created a society where parents barely raise their own kids. They abandoned their elders instead of caring for them. They turned marriage into an economic transaction instead of a relationship. They built cultures of extreme individualism, then wonder why their families fall apart. Even today, they struggle to maintain any real sense of community. At some point, we have to ask, if white people were truly the most family-oriented civilization, why have their family structures been crumbling for centuries? Medieval European nobility sent their children away to be raised by servants and tutors. Peasants put their kids to work in fields and factories instead of raising them with care. Fathers were emotionally absent, only expected to provide money, not affection. Mothers had little say in their own marriages, leading to cold, transactional family dynamics. Meanwhile, non-white societies had stronger family bonds. Indigenous African and Asian cultures emphasized extended family and community care. Children were raised with strong connections to their elders and ancestors. Family was seen as a lifelong responsibility, not as a burden to be offloaded. White people weren't leading family values. They were avoiding real connections from the start. Marriage in Europe was about land, wealth, and status, not love or partnership. Parents used their children as bargaining chips to secure economic and political alliances. Fights over inheritance led to endless family feuds, lawsuits, and betrayals. Even today, white families are torn apart over wills, property disputes, and money fights. Meanwhile, other cultures prioritized family over greed. Many African and indigenous societies shared land communally instead of hoarding it. Asian cultures emphasized filial piety, caring for elders, and maintaining generational respect. Family was about mutual support, not extracting wealth from each other. White families weren't about love and support. They were about transactions and greed. White people invented nursing homes because they didn't want to care for their elders. In most non-white cultures, elders remain within the family and are respected for their wisdom. In Europe and America, old people are dumped in institutions to die alone. By the 19th century, workhouses became dumping grounds for the elderly, poor, and sick. Today, white families see taking care of parents as a burden instead of a responsibility. Meanwhile, other cultures maintain respect for their elders. Indigenous societies honor elders as knowledge keepers and decision makers. Many African and Asian cultures keep elders in the home as an integral part of the family. There's no such thing as dumping grandma in a home in non-white cultures. White families weren't nurturing, they were outsourcing their responsibilities. White families have always been emotionally repressed and dysfunctional. Victorian-era families saw emotions as weakness, leading to generations of emotional neglect. Fathers were distant, children were disciplined through fear, and affection was seen as improper. The stiff upper lip culture prioritized coldness and detachment over genuine care. Generations of white kids grew up without love, leading to cycles of trauma and dysfunction. Meanwhile, non-white families fostered emotional bonds. Indigenous and African parenting emphasized community support and emotional guidance. Asian cultures prioritized harmony and communication within family units. Even in hardship, non-white families maintain warmth and connection. White families weren't teaching strength, they were breeding emotional dysfunction. White people have always been lonely because they designed their societies that way. They built suburbs where families lived in isolation instead of in strong communities. They pushed individualism so hard that even their families barely functioned. They created nuclear families, breaking generational bonds and community support systems. They worked themselves to death, leaving no time for family relationships. Meanwhile, other cultures prioritized togetherness. Indigenous and African communities built villages and extended family networks. Latino and Asian cultures maintained multi-generational households. Family was about more than parents and children. It was about community. White people weren't building strong families. They were isolating themselves to death. If white families were truly the best, why have they spent history falling apart? Cope.